The envelope was on the kitchen counter when Michael got home from work. He almost walked past it. White. Thin. No return address he recognized, just his name printed in that flat, bureaucratic font that doesn't try to be friendly because it doesn't have to be. He was still in his coat when he opened it. His father had been gone 4 months. The grief had started to settle, not go away, just settle, the way heavy things do. Michael had already handled the accounts, the arrangements, the paperwork. He told himself the worst was behind him. He'd even said it to his wife the week before, standing in the kitchen, almost exactly where he was standing now. "I think we're through the hardest part." Then he read the letter. He read it again. Same page. Same number. He set it on the counter, walked to the window, then came back. Still the same number. The IRA, $310,000, built across 32 years of careful, deliberate saving, was supposed to flow to him and his sister. Ray had said so at the kitchen table. He'd said it over the phone. He'd said it with the calm certainty of a man who had done what he was supposed to do. And until that envelope showed up, Michael had no reason to believe anything had changed. But the letter wasn't confirming a gift. It was laying out a tax schedule. A mandatory withdrawal timeline. A countdown that had already been running for 4 months without Michael knowing it. And the clock had not started the day he opened that envelope. The clock had started the day Ray died. That's the piece almost nobody is warned about. Not until they're already inside it. Here's what I need you to sit with before anything else in this story. The decision that caused all of this wasn't made in the weeks after Ray passed. It wasn't made in some complicated transaction or overlooked financial move. It was made years earlier, on a Sunday evening, at a dinner table, over cold coffee, by a man who had every reason to believe he was doing everything right. Let me take you back to that table. Ray was 71. Still walking the neighborhood every morning. Still knew every neighbor by name. He had a financial advisor he trusted for nearly a decade, 2 adult children he was proud of, and a traditional IRA sitting at around $280,000. He'd done what a careful man does, named his kids on the beneficiary form, checked in with his advisor every couple of years, kept the estate clean and simple. Nothing complicated. Nothing left unaddressed. His son Michael asked him one evening, "Dad, is everything set up right? Should we be doing anything?" Ray looked up from his coffee. "Already done. Everything goes to you and your sister. I made sure of it years ago. Don't worry about it." He wasn't brushing it off. He genuinely meant it. His advisor had never flagged a concern. The beneficiary form had the right names. The account was healthy. Nothing had tripped an alarm, because the alarm was built into a law that passed in December 2019 and quietly rewired how inherited IRAs work for nearly every adult child in the country. And neither Ray, nor his advisor, nor anyone at that Sunday table, had gone back to check whether the rules had changed since the last time they'd looked. They had. Completely. So what exactly changed? Before 2019, a child who inherited a parent's traditional IRA had something called the stretch provision. They could take withdrawals across their entire lifetime, slowly, carefully, in amounts that kept tax bills manageable. If you were 45 when you inherited, you could spread those withdrawals across 35 or 40 more years. The account breathed. Tax bites stayed modest. The whole idea of an IRA as a generational savings tool held together under those rules. Then the Secure Act passed. For most adult children, not every heir, but most, the stretch disappeared overnight. Congress replaced it with the 10-year rule. From the date of the account owner's death, most beneficiaries now have exactly 10 years to withdraw the entire balance. If the original owner had already started required minimum distributions before they died, the heir must also take annual withdrawals throughout that decade, and still empty the account by the deadline. If the owner hadn't started their RMDs yet, the heir can hold off on annual pulls, but the full balance still has to be gone by the end of year 10. There is no exception for the heir's age. No hardship extension. No flexibility for timing. 10 years, hard stop, and the meter had already been running for 4 months when Michael opened that envelope. Now here's where the timeline stops mattering and real money starts. Michael was 47 years old. Senior engineer. He was earning $130,000 a year. His half of his father's IRA came to roughly $155,000. Spread evenly over 10 years, that's about $15,500 per year in forced withdrawals. On paper, that doesn't sound catastrophic. Until it lands. Year 1 isn't the problem. Neither is year 2 in isolation. The issue is that this income addition, modest by itself, significant in context, shows up every single year for a decade. The bracket exposure accumulates. The cost of taking money out on a mandatory schedule instead of waiting for a lower income year adds up. And that pattern doesn't soften. It repeats. That $15,500 lands directly on top of his existing $130,000 salary. His taxable income becomes $145,500. His federal bracket climbs. State taxes follow it up. And because the withdrawals are mandatory, they don't bend around a slow year, a market dip, or a year Michael might have chosen to limit his income for other reasons. He has very little ability to manage the damage. And there's more beneath that surface. And that forced income doesn't just hit your tax bracket, it quietly raises Medicare premiums and increases how much of your Social Security gets taxed. Then move immediately to the $40,000 to $50,000 number. Keep the momentum. What looks like a $15,000 annual addition can quietly carry several thousand in secondary costs that nobody mentioned when someone first wrote his name on that beneficiary form. Over 10 years, accounting for bracket exposure and the compound effect of paying more every single year on income he had no choice but to take, somewhere between $40,000 and $50,000 of Michael's inheritance will move quietly from the IRA to the IRS and the state. Not because he made a risky decision. Not because the market turned on him. Because his father passed him money in a form that the current tax code treats as ordinary income, arriving at the exact moment in Michael's life when ordinary income is taxed the hardest. That number, $40,000 to $50,000, wasn't an estimate Michael softened. He checked it 3 times. Ray hadn't been negligent. That's what makes this story hard to sit with. He'd been attentive. Consistent. He'd kept the account funded, kept the advisor, updated the beneficiary form when he was supposed to. He had done every version of responsible that everyone around him would have recognized as responsible. What nobody in his circle did, not the advisor, not the accountant, not anyone, was go back to the law itself after 2019 and ask whether the rules underneath this plan had shifted. They had shifted. And by the time anyone in that family understood that, Ray was already gone. The damage was settled before the funeral. Now let me show you the other version of this story. Not to extend the regret, but because the other version is still available to some of you watching this right now. That's the only part of this that still matters. The most accessible answer to the 10-year trap is a Roth conversion. While a traditional IRA owner is alive, they can choose to move some or all of the account into a Roth IRA. They pay income tax on the converted amount in the year it moves, their rate, their income, their timeline. It's not free, but it's controlled. When a Roth IRA passes to a child, the 10-year rule still applies. The Secure Act didn't carve out a Roth exemption. But the withdrawals from an inherited Roth come out tax-free. The child isn't adding taxable income on top of a full salary. The inheritance functions the way a gift was supposed to. If Ray had begun converting $25,000 or $30,000 per year starting at 67 or 68, paying the tax himself, at his own rate, probably 22 or 24%, he would have slowly changed the nature of that account. By the time it passed to his children, the tax debt would already have been paid. Settled. At his rate, not theirs. On his terms, not a schedule nobody asked for. The $155,000 Michael received could have arrived clean. Instead, he received the countdown. For larger estates, there are other structures worth understanding: charitable remainder trusts, life insurance strategies built to absorb the inheritance tax gap, broader repositioning before death. But Roth conversion is the tool available to most families. It doesn't require a legal team. It doesn't require a 7-figure estate. It requires understanding the problem exists while there's still time to address it. And that's the sentence this entire story turns on. While there's still time. Michael sat down with an estate attorney in year 4. 6 years remained on the clock. Some things were still adjustable. His own accounts, his own beneficiary designations, the inheritance picture he was building for his own kids. He could still protect forward. But his father's IRA had already committed to its path. That conversation arrived 4 years too late to change what Ray had left behind. Ray never had that conversation at all. He thought he had. He believed the plan he described at that table, calmly, lovingly, over Sunday coffee, with complete and genuine care, was the plan his children would actually receive. He didn't know that a law passed quietly in Washington while he was living his careful, ordinary, responsible life had already rewritten what they would get. That's the wound at the center of this story. Not recklessness. Not neglect. Just the quiet, devastating gap between what people trust is still true and what the rules actually say. The thing Ray would have wanted was simple: for his children to receive what he built. He didn't save for 32 years to send half of it to the government. He saved to give them options. He just didn't know the structure he'd chosen had stopped doing what he thought it was doing. If there's a traditional IRA in your family right now, yours, a parent's, a spouse's, with a name on a beneficiary form and no recent conversation attached to it, you're already at some point in this story. The only question is how early. Michael understood in year 4. His father never understood at all. Don't be the person opening the letter. If you'd rather find out now than open that letter, hit like. In the comments, drop one financial decision you'd want a second look at, knowing what you know now. It doesn't have to be about an IRA. Just one thing. I read every one of these, and sometimes what you write becomes the warning someone else needed to hear. Subscribe to Henry Wealth Blueprint. The next warning I bring you might find you before the letter does. Not after.